everything gets done around here. Every bike that needs to get built gets done. Everybody's working at all times. And you know what? 10 years. This is the kind of stuff we've been dealing with for 10 years.
Paul Teutul Junior was the fan favorite on American Chopper, known for his bold designs and even bolder personality. But behind the cameras, a heartbreaking family feud was unfolding. What really tore Paul Jr. and his father apart right in front of millions? Was the fame worth the cost? This isn't just a story about custom motorcycles. It's a raw look at broken dreams, family battles, and the hidden price of reality TV fame. And what Paul Jr. reveals today might surprise you. The calm before the breakdown. In the early 2000s, American Chopper became one of the most talked about shows on television. At first glance, it seemed to be about building custom bikes. But underneath the chrome and engines, it was really about family, pride, and heartbreak. The real engine behind the show wasn't the motorcycles. It was the father and son who built them and slowly broke each other in the process. Orange County Choppers, a motorcycle garage in upstate New York, was the heart of the operation. At its center stood a father and son who worked together to build a future together. Paul Teutul Sr., bold and strong-willed, was used to calling the shots. His son, Paul Teutul Jr., an artist and visionary, poured his soul into the designs that made their bikes stand out. Together, they built something extraordinary. But behind the scenes, the tension quietly brewed. Fans first tuned in for the craftsmanship, but they quickly became captivated by the raw family drama. The father and son rarely saw eye to eye, and their clashes were intense. The honesty of their relationship, at times loving, at times stormy, gave the show its spark. American Chopper premiered on March 31, 2003 on the Discovery Channel. It gave viewers a front-row seat to life at Orange County Choppers and quickly became a hit. The show ran for 8 seasons and 179 episodes. Then came the spin-off, Senior vs. Junior, which aired from 2010 to 2012 and made their growing feud the centerpiece. In 2018, the Teutuls returned for a reboot, older, maybe more reflective, but the deep cracks in their relationship still showed. But long before the TV deals, the million-dollar builds, or the famous fallout, there was a quieter story unfolding. It was the story of a boy growing up in the shadow of a tough, demanding father. A boy with creative gifts no one quite knew what to do with. A designer in a steel cage. The early life of Paul Jr. Paul Michael Teutul Jr. was born on October 2, 1974, in Orange County, New York, the oldest of 4 children. He grew up with his brothers, Michael and Daniel, and his sister Kristen, in a home shaped by discipline and hard work. His father, Paul Teutul Sr., was known for being tough and focused, a man who believed in earning respect through effort. His mother, Paula Teutul, was Senior's first wife and the woman who balanced out some of that grit. From a young age, Paul Jr.'s world was filled with the sounds of clanging metal and the smell of burning steel. While most kids were riding bikes, he was learning how to build them. His father owned Orange County Iron Works, a steel fabrication company, and summers weren't for play. They were for welding. By age 12, Paul Jr. was already working in the shop, learning side by side with seasoned professionals. But even then, Paul Jr. stood out. Where his father valued strength and structure, Paul Jr. was drawn to style and creativity. He didn't just see steel as a tool, he saw it as a canvas. While other workers focused on measurements and deadlines, he imagined flowing shapes, custom designs, and bikes that could make people stop and stare. That quiet passion soon led him toward vocational education, where he studied welding, machining, and fabrication through the Board of Cooperative Educational Services program. His skills were solid, but his imagination was stronger. Here's where it gets interesting. Paul Jr. secretly sketches motorcycles inside old notebooks after a long day at work. One day, Paul Sr. noticed those sketches, and for a moment, something shifted. Behind his no-nonsense front, Sr. saw what many would later come to admire: his son's raw talent. It was clear, Paul Jr. wasn't just a worker in his father's shop. He was a designer in the making. In 1999, Paul Sr. and Jr. teamed up to start Orange County Choppers, a company that built custom motorcycles. Some people believe they used money from their family's ironworks business to get it off the ground. But no one knows the full details for sure. What is clear is that this new business changed their lives. Orange County Choppers quickly grabbed attention for its bold, creative bikes and unique designs. But what if building your dream meant breaking your family? What happens when the world watches your success, but also your pain? Can fame create a legacy without tearing love apart? The garage that made legends and broke them. It all started in a small garage in Montgomery, New York. Orange County Choppers wasn't fancy, but what Paul Sr. and Paul Jr. had was special. Paul Sr. had the tools and old-school grit, while Paul Jr. had the eye for design and the kind of imagination that turned steel into art. Together, they made bikes that stood out. Their first big hit, True Blue, debuted in 1999 at Daytona's Biketoberfest. It was the spark that lit everything. Then came the Black Widow bike, bold, black, and red, with a web design that made people stop and stare. And the Fire bike, honoring the heroes lost on a historic tragedy, showed the world that these weren't just bikes. They were statements. By 2003, they moved into a massive 61,000 square foot shop in Newburgh. The Teutuls weren't just bike builders anymore. They were stars. It didn't end there. That same year, everything changed again. A call from the Discovery Channel turned their lives into a show. American Chopper. At first, Jr. wasn't sure about cameras following their every move. But Paul Sr. saw an opportunity. When the show aired, everyone loved it. Viewers were hooked, not just on the bikes, but on the fights. The yelling, the silence, the slammed doors. It was raw and real. The fame came fast. What used to be small family disagreements were now front and center on national TV. Later on, Paul Jr. admitted that the show began to focus more on conflict than craftsmanship. The very show that made them famous was also turning them into something they never wanted to be. Competitors, with the world watching every stumble. They built a global brand, but the cost was high. And the saddest part? While the world watched them build dream bikes, they were quietly losing the dream of staying a family. The fight that changed everything. It was a typical morning at Orange County Choppers until Paul Jr. showed up late. The tension that had been brewing for months finally boiled over. Paul Sr. confronted him, and the argument quickly turned explosive. Years of frustration came spilling out, and this time, it wasn't just another father-son fight. Something shifted that day. Lines were crossed, and a crack formed that would be hard to repair. Paul Jr., overwhelmed, flung a chair across the shop. Yeah, you heard right. Everyone was stunned, unsure whether to keep filming or step away. Paul Sr., furious, marched toward him, but Jr. didn't wait. He stormed out. And then came the breaking point. Sr. fired his own son, right there with the cameras still rolling. This wasn't staged. There were no scripts, no rehearsals, just years of built-up anger erupting into one unforgettable moment. For viewers, it was unforgettable. But for the Teutels, it was something far more painful. A breaking point they couldn't undo. That day didn't just end in a fight. It left behind real damage. For Paul Jr., it wasn't just losing a job. It felt like being cut off from his own family. The garage that once felt like home suddenly felt like enemy territory. But the story wasn't finished. What came next wasn't about bikes. It was about legal battles, silence, and finding his voice. What happens when you're fired from a business you helped build? And how far would a father go to erase his own son's legacy? Let's dive into the courtroom war, the legal war that tore them further apart. Getting fired from Orange County Choppers was just the beginning of Paul Jr.'s heartbreak. What fans didn't see behind the cameras was that Paul Jr. still legally owned 20% of the company, even after his father kicked him out. Paul Sr., who held the remaining 80%, wasn't comfortable sharing power. So he tried to take full control by using a hidden clause in their contract called a buyout clause. That clause said Sr. could forcefully buy out Jr.'s shares if he left the company. Now, here's the kicker. The buyout offer was just $175,000, which is a pocket change for a company pulling in millions and plastered across TV screens nationwide. To Paul Jr., it felt like a slap in the face. This wasn't just about money. It was about pride, legacy, and being cut out of something he helped build from the ground up. Now here's where things really took a turn. Paul Jr. did the unthinkable. He sued his own father. He filed the case in the New York State Supreme Court, arguing that the buyout clause in his contract was vague, unfair, and designed to push him out. At first, the odds were stacked against him. The court brought in an outside appraiser to decide what his shares were worth, which could have locked him into that same low offer of $175,000. It looked like Paul Sr. might win again. But Paul Jr. didn't give up. He kept fighting for his share of the company, for his name, and for his self-respect. In 2010, the appellate court overturned the decision. The judges agreed the contract was too unclear to be enforced. Just like that, Paul Jr. won the case. However, this wasn't just a legal victory. For Paul Jr., it was personal. For the first time, he wasn't just seen as the angry son of reality TV. He was recognized as a co-founder, a designer, and someone who had helped build Orange County Choppers from the ground up. He had earned his place, and finally, his voice was heard. But even after the courtroom victory, another challenge held him back. A non-compete clause in the original contract banned Paul Jr. from starting any competing bike business for 1 full year. That meant 12 long months of creative silence. This was really a trying time for him, but he didn't give up. Meanwhile, back at Orange County Choppers, something felt off. Paul Sr. was still building bikes, but the fun was gone. The shop felt cold, like the heart had left with Paul Jr. And here's the real tea. People who worked on the show later said producers made the fights look even worse just to stir up drama. That famous moment when Paul Sr. threw a chair? Totally real, not scripted. It was raw, and it was painful. Looking back, Paul Jr. didn't hold back. He called the shop toxic and went further to admit getting fired was the best thing that ever happened to him. Paul Jr. built an empire. After a year of silence, Paul Jr. was finally free. The non-compete clause had expired. Most people might have quit after being fired on national TV, but not Paul Jr. He used that year to sketch, plan, and dream. And when the time came, he launched Paul Jr. Designs, a brand built from scratch, powered by vision and grit. He didn't do it alone. He teamed up with Vinny DiMartino, a longtime friend from Orange County Chopper, who left years earlier. Their new shop was different. No drama or camera, just respect and creativity. For Paul Jr., it was the kind of work environment he'd always wanted. Each bike Paul Jr. built told a story. Anti-Venom was the first, sleek, bold, and impossible to ignore. Then came the Geico bike, with futuristic lines and paint that changed color. The P-51 Mustang bike honored World War II fighter planes, while the Cadillac CTS Phi bike blended raw power with luxury. But the historic tragedy Memorial bike hit the deepest. It wasn't just a tribute. It was Junior's heart poured into steel. But Paul Jr. didn't stop at bikes. He launched a full clothing line under the Paul Jr. Designs name. Hats, hoodies, and gear that let fans wear a piece of his world. It caught on fast. At the same time, he teamed up with big brands and took on meaningful charity builds, expanding his impact far beyond the garage. By 2025, his net worth had climbed to $15 million. Not from reality TV drama, but from pure creativity, grit, and growth. He turned a painful public fallout into a triumph and built a legacy that was entirely his own. Beyond the spotlight, Paul Jr.'s personal life. After years in the spotlight, Paul Jr. finally found peace with Rachel Beaster. She wasn't after fame. She was steady, kind, and had her own boutique in New York. They met briefly on the show in 2008, but their real connection grew quietly off camera. In 2010, they got married in a sweet beachside wedding in New Jersey. It was a joyful moment, but one important person was missing. Paul Sr. was nowhere to be found, and his absence said it all. After everything they'd been through, Paul Jr. had hoped his dad would put their fights aside just for one day, his wedding day. But he didn't show up, and that quiet hurt more than any of their loudest arguments. Something inside Paul cracked that day. Still, he smiled, stood tall, and made the best of it. It was his big day, and no matter what was missing, he chose joy. Because deep down, even with the heartbreak, it really was the happiest day of his life. For 7 long years, Paul and Rachel hoped to have a child. Then, in 2018, their dream finally came true. They welcomed their son, Hudson 7 Teutul, and shared the joyful news with fans. It was a moment that changed everything. Becoming a dad changed something deep inside Paul Jr. Holding his own child made him think differently about everything, including his relationship with his father. It didn't erase the past or make the pain disappear, but it gave him a new perspective. Some of the anger began to fade, and instead of just feeling hurt, he started to reflect. Slowly, the walls he had built began to come down, even if just a little. Also, while Paul Jr. was building a more peaceful life, another part of his world was hurting too. His bond with his brother Mikey had also been pulled apart. It was tested by the same family tension. Brothers torn apart. The strain between Paul Jr. and Mikey Teutul. While everyone was focused on the tension between Paul Jr. and his father, only a few noticed the quiet strain unraveling between Paul Jr. and his younger brother Mikey. Mikey had always been the heart of the Teutul family. He wasn't the builder or the boss, but he brought warmth and humor to a shop known for high pressure and short tempers. The truth is, the fight between Paul Jr. and his dad didn't just hurt them. It hurt Mikey too. And slowly, it pulled the brothers apart. Mikey didn't want to pick sides. He loved them both. But being stuck in the middle was just too hard. In 2012, he quietly walked away from Orange County Choppers, hoping to escape the drama. But that choice also created space between him and Paul Jr. For almost 10 years, the brothers didn't talk much. Not because they were mad, but because the pain in their family made it hard to connect. The silence between them grew, and neither one really knew how to fix it. However, things slowly got better. Paul Jr. made an effort to let the past go and open the door again. He didn't push too hard, just reached out, little by little. And Mikey, who had stepped away from the bike world, was ready to meet him halfway. By 2025, they weren't as close as they once were, but the cold silence was gone. They talk more now, share a few laughs, and understand each other better. It's not perfect, but it's peaceful. And sometimes, that's enough. Still miles apart. The heartbreaking story of Paul Jr. After years of building bikes, chasing big dreams, and fighting with the people closest to him, Paul Teutul Jr. has finally found some peace. He's now a husband, a father, and a man who understands that not everything broken can be fixed. But the distance between him and his father still hurts. When American Chopper returned in 2018, fans hoped that maybe this time things would be different. Paul Jr. and Paul Sr. were back in the same shop, working side by side. But the tension was still there, just quieter. There was no drama like before, but there was no real connection either. Paul Jr. called their relationship professional. That one word said it all. In a 2025 interview, Paul Jr. shared something really sad. He said it had been over 15 years since he and Paul Sr. had a real meal together. No dinners, no birthdays, no heart-to-heart talks. Just work and silence. He wasn't angry anymore, just worn out from always being the one who tried to fix things. Paul Jr. has done so much on his own. He started his own company. He built a beautiful family. He even repaired his relationship with his brother Mikey. But even with all that growth and success, the space between him and his father still runs deep. Not because of hate, but because of all the things that were never said and moments that never happened. That's what really breaks his heart. It's not the big fights on TV or the legal battles. The real pain comes from the quiet distance between a father and a son who just couldn't meet in the middle. Today, Paul Jr. is living a better life. He laughs more, stresses less, and puts all his love into being the kind of dad he always wished he had. He's moved on in many ways. But even with all the healing, one thing still hurts. He and Paul Sr. never truly made peace. They built bikes that wowed the world, but the one thing they never built was a way back to each other. And as the years pass, one quiet question remains. In the end, is success enough when it can't heal the distance between family? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. If you enjoyed this video, click on the next video on your screen.